Hey everybody, Richard Tremont here at Law Punx, and another episode, this time with Scott Stevenson from Spellbook in Canada. Hey Scott, good to have you with us. I'm not going to do a big preamble, we're going to get straight into this. So Scott basically has a very key point that he wants to make, which is that refinement is a scam. Take it away, Scott.
Yeah, so one of the views I hold, which I think has been under-discussed, is that fine-tuning legal AI models turned out to be a little bit of a scam. And we were one of the first companies in the world to use fine-tuning with large language models for legal work way back in 2022. The models weren't very good at that time, and you definitely did, to some extent, need to try fine-tuning to either reduce costs or to improve accuracy. But fine-tuning as a technique, we hear about it from our customers at Spellbook all the time. We have 4,000 law firms and legal teams on board. We meet with about 400 teams a week right now of prospects. And we still get the question all the time, like, oh, are you using fine-tuned models and so on? And what has happened over the past 3 years is I think fine-tuning has actually become fairly useless technique a lot of the time, and I think is highly, highly, highly overrated compared to other techniques and approaches to getting these models to work really, really well for lawyers.
Okay, well, we're going to keep digging, but just for the audience's sake, can you just explain what do we mean by fine-tuning? So you've got your model, you've got your LLM, you've got your GPT-5, your Claude, your whatever it is. Then legal tech company comes along and says, "Oh, great, we'll fine tune your model with all this lovely legal data, which will make it much, much better." Is that basically right?
Yeah, basically the idea that you're going to have this underlying large language model and you're going to feed it, a bunch of legal data and train the model itself to basically in some way or another kind of remember that data in its long-term memory and in its essence to make it better at legal work. And this is something we have done for certain techniques at Spellbook, but it turned out to actually not be that great a technique in the long run. One example I'll give before I get into the legal side is a Bloomberg trained a model for financial work a couple years ago. And I think they might have spent like a couple million training it. And as soon as GPT-4 came out, that model performed better than Bloomberg's model that they had spent a ton of time and energy training. And this pattern has happened over and over again.
But hold on, I
Yeah,
just want to clarify
yeah.
before we dig further, just so people understand. So we're talking about, so you've got your basic LLM. How do you add to that though?
Yeah. So there are open source models where you can literally get into them and train them on more data. Also have, even with OpenAI, they do offer sort of fine tuning services, which use other techniques to basically, I won't go too deep into the technical details, but they use other techniques to do something similar in maybe like a little bit more of a scalable way where you're not necessarily training the model directly, but they kind of have this fine tuning or learning layer on top. But you know, and these techniques have actually are okay for maybe some of the agentic work, but the idea that you're going to like train a model on all of these contracts or all of legislation, and now it's just going to perfectly remember everything is not the best way to do things. And the analogy I'll give is, imagine you're a human. I think like thinking of large language models like humans, intuitively is actually a really gives you really good intuition about how to work with these systems. Imagine you're asking a human to, remember all of, say, Edgar, the SEC's sort of database that contains many contracts. And you're asking a human to put that in its the human's long-term memory. That's going to cause hallucination because our long-term memory is not that good. Our long-term memory hallucinates. So actually, that method of imbuing these models with knowledge, actually relying on it too heavily is actually what causes hallucination. And there was sort of this, I think, misunderstanding that by fine tuning on legal data, we can actually reduce hallucination. And while that might be true to an extent, the idea of relying on the model sort of baked in long-term memory is actually what causes hallucination the most of the time. So it's actually a really bad approach. The alternative are approaches like RAG and agentic RAG, so retrieval augmented generation, not a new thing anymore, but I think very underhyped because it doesn't sound as sexy. But the way we think of models now at Spellbook is that, they're a layer of human reasoning, of human logic, of human like thinking, but they're not really where you want to store knowledge and information because they're fallible. If you're storing your knowledge and information inside a large language model, it's going to be fallible and it's going to hallucinate, and that's going to give you bad results. If you
So, so,
instead
so so
teach,
effectively, what you're
yeah,
saying is it's better to let the big boys, OpenAI, Anthropic, and everyone else build their LLMs, which come out every 6 months, whatever, and then just add workflows, agents, you name it, on top of that, and don't mess around with it. Just let it, just use that improved language understanding, use their improved, we hope, reasoning and so forth, and then build on top of that. Literally just like an extension, rather than trying to get into training that data.
oftentimes, yes. I mean, there are different use cases in agents, for instance, where maybe reinforcement learning is becoming a little bit more useful again. But generally, yes, treating these models as like a layer of human reasoning, not as a database where you're storing knowledge, and then access to knowledge in other ways has been a better approach and gives us better results.
Is it a question of the quantity of data? I mean, if you could give, the latest version of, whatever, GPT-5, whatever, the latest thing, right? If you could give it 25 billion tokens worth of legal data, surely that would make some positive impact. Or are you just going to confuse the language model because the language model is generalistic, and by dumping a great big legal
Yeah.
chunk right into the middle of it, just kind of mess with its brain?
Yeah, I mean, it's not deterministic. Yeah, it might help and it might help you get some better results, but I think you don't want the model to be looking in its long-term memory to remember, oh, what was that contract that, Microsoft signed in, 1991. Yeah, it's just not, because
Would you
models are
would you
effectively compressing information, and compression is lossy. Um, it's much better to teach these models how to go and fetch this information, how to search for it, to assist them in finding the correct information, and then they can provide it to you with citations. So the amazing part about RAG is that you can, yeah, have fresh real-time information. So the other problem with fine tuning is, there's always a knowledge cutoff. I for GPT-5, for instance, there's a knowledge cutoff of, maybe like, I don't know the specific date right now, but it's probably at least 6 months old and doesn't know anything much sooner unless it goes and searches the web. So you don't want to be having to like constantly retrain the models. Whereas if you rely on teaching the models to go and fetch information and find information, you can do everything in real time. You can have, the most real time legislation. You can have the most real time case law and so on. And you have citations. And so it's just a way, way better approach to kind of think about the knowledge separately and think about the LLMs as sort of your layer of human reasoning. And I think we've been building in this space since 2022. It turns out there's actually just an enormous amount to build around models. In some cases, we still might use a fine-tuned model for a very specific task where we want like a low cost, we want it to be really fast. Building, it's much more effective to build around them, and there's a lot to build.
And that goes to the
Yeah.
broader debate. Just to wrap up, we've got 10 seconds left. Just to wrap up, I mean, I think what you're saying goes to the broader debate about what are the benefits of legal tech tools, which
Mhm.
is, and some people kind of look down their nose at application layer and workflows and data management and so forth. But really, that is where the value of legal tech is, because you can't mess with the base models. The base models have been taught, developed language understanding. That's what they're good at. You then take that and you apply it through the application layer, through the data that you've curated, through the workflow, through the agents, and then you get your good results, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Can I go into overtime? I have another point. Or
A
not. It's okay if not.
special bonus, 1 minute starting now.
The other secondary point I will make is I think the evaluation of these systems is far more subjective than what people want to admit. So when we look at a Spellbook, we're AI contract review tool. We've seen probably over 10 million contracts. And what we look at is our suggestion acceptance rate. So when we suggest a red line to a contract, we're looking at what percentage of those actually gets accepted by a lawyer. And when we first launched Spellbook, the acceptance rate was maybe 5%. Now our acceptance rate is 60%, and we've driven that acceptance rate up through like an enormous amount of iteration, hooking in different data sources. But a big thing that we've been doing more recently that's in beta is preference learning. So contract review is highly, highly subjective. Every client and lawyer has a different way of doing things. There really isn't an objective answer in most cases. And there's the context of the deal and the power dynamic of the deal. So like we think like memory and preference learning is incredibly important and something that's not being taken into account very well. And I think in some ways we think of Spellbook more like a YouTube recommendation algorithm of red lines than like something that's giving you, this objective, mathematically correct answer. And the more that someone uses Spellbook, the better and more accurate those suggestions should come to their preferences. And that's not something you can do with fine tuning, because fine tuning kind of trains your model for everyone without that's kind of subjective preference learning. So I think we're going to see, RAG's already super, super popular. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more preference learning, because just training one model for all customers and all users everywhere just only gets you so far. Legal problems are highly subjective and very preference driven. And RAG and memory are a way that we can drive results there.
All right. Also, I'm going to stop you there. Thanks, Scott. Awesome. And I should just say, for the record, what Scott says basically applies to all legal tech companies and all legal tech companies therefore benefit